Good day, everyone. We are here today to present our study entitled The Effects of Audiovisual Presentation on Test Performance. The main objective of this study is to determine the effects of audiovisual presentation on the test performance of second-year BS Psychology students in Limerick colleges. Specifically, this aims to determine the test scores of the experimental group after the experiment, determine the test scores of the control group after the experiment, and determine the significant difference between the test scores of the experimental and control group after the experiment.
Now, we will proceed in our introduction. Background of the study. Individual learning styles depend on cognitive, emotional, and environmental factors, as well as one's prior experience. The term learning styles speaks to the understanding that every student learns differently. Every student has their own technique that they prepare to use to remember information more efficiently while studying. They become much more efficient, productive, and successful, and it is more probable that they will produce their best work. They manage to apply their strengths. Some of them prepare visual learning, and some also want to hear lessons being discussed. For the past years, most teaching techniques used to rely almost completely on verbal communication between the teacher and the student, or written information from print source to the student. Audiovisual aids are a number of instruments that appeal to both the auditory and visual senses, and are used in the classroom to communicate a variety of information. Audiovisuals are important in education system. Besides, audiovisuals are a great tool to catch the audience attention and help them to get involved into the learning process without problem. They help to present the material in an attractive way so that it is more meaningful for everyone to process the subject, says by Raul and others in the year 2011.
Significance of the study. This research study will be beneficial to the following. First is for the students. It will help the students to be more knowledgeable on what kind of presentation is more effective in their study. This study will provide information about their specific preferences. Second is for the teachers. It will help them to consciously choose a type of strategy that will help their students for better learning. They will be knowledgeable if the strategies being implemented is effective. It will be useful for the teachers because they will understand how to improve the way they learn and teach. Third is for the school administrators. It will help them to recognize the importance of audiovisual presentation for the test performance of the students. Fourth is for the parents. It will be beneficial because gaining understanding of their specific presentation can enhance the way in which we teach them throughout their life and help them master their schoolwork and succeed in life. Lastly, this study will be significant for the future researchers. This study will be useful to the future researchers, for this will be a guide in conducting the same research.
Now, we will move on to the scope and limitation of the study. The research study will be limited to the assessment of the effects of audiovisual presentation, specifically in the major subject of Sci 103, the developmental psychology. Through the use of lecture video on the test performance of the second-year Bachelor of Science in Psychology students of Limerick colleges in academic year 2021 to 2022.
Now, I will present and discuss the theoretical and conceptual framework or model that shows how the interrelationship among variables integral to the phenomenon being studied will be investigated. Theoretical orientation. In analyzing the effects of audiovisual presentation on test performance of second-year BS Psychology students in Lemery Colleges for academic year 2021 to 2022, the study will be anchored in cognitive theory of multimedia learning, which is based on three main assumptions. There are two separate channels, which are the auditory and visual, for processing information. There is limited capacity, and that learning is an active process of filtering, selecting, organizing, and integrating information. Now, we move on to conceptual framework. This figure shows the paradigm of our study. The input. The input contains the objectives of our study. 1. Determine the test scores of the experimental group after the experiment. 2. Determine the test scores of the control group after the experiment. And the last one, determine the significant difference between the test scores of experimental and control group after the experiment. The process. The process shows how are we going to determine if there is a possible difference between the test scores after using audiovisual presentation as a learning tool. And lastly, the output, which shows the possible effects of audiovisual presentation on the test performance of students that can be used as a basis to determine what type of learning modalities can be more effective on students' learning and recalling information.
Research design. This study will utilize a between-subject design, particularly two independent groups in which participants of the study are placed in each two treatment conditions randomly. It aims to determine the uses of independent variable and to derive if there is a possible difference between the variables.
Sources of data. The researchers will collect the data from two sources. The primary source of data will be the test performance result to be gathered by the researchers through Google Forms, and the secondary source of data will be from journals and articles.
Participants of the study. The respondents of this study will be second-year college students of Lemery Colleges who are officially enrolled during data gathering procedure in the academic year 2021 to 2022 in BS Psychology program.
The data will be gathered in the following procedures. First, the researcher will submit a request letter to the school head for the approval of the conduct of the study. Upon the approval, we will coordinate with the subject teacher and explain the details in conducting the experimental research. Then we will start by briefing our participants that our study aims to determine the effects of audiovisual presentation to their test performance. After explaining the nature of our study, we will divide them into two groups, the experimental group and control group, in which the experimental group will be the participants who will receive the treatment or those who will use audiovisual presentation, and the control group are those who will not receive the experimental treatment. In the session of the experimental research, the researchers will use audiovisual presentation to the experimental group. They will be assigned to watch lecture videos for 30 minutes and another 30 minutes to take the test. Next, we will start collecting all the data based on the results of the test. Then make an analysis to the gathered data, and last is the formulation of recommendations based on the results. Sampling procedures. In choosing the respondents for this study, the researchers will utilize the simple random sample method for the psychology students of Lemery Colleges. Simple random sampling is a sampling method wherein A portion of a whole population is selected in an unbiased way, in which members of population being studied has an equal chance of being selected.
Statistical treatment of the study. The researcher will apply the following statistic in the analysis of the data to be gathered in the study. Mean. In this study, mean will be used to determine the effects of audiovisual presentation on the test performance. Independent t-test is a parametric test that is used to compare the means of two independent groups in order to determine whether there is a statistical evidence that the associated population means are significantly different. In this study, the statistics that will be used is the independent t-test to know the significant difference between the means, the audiovisual presentation.
Expected outcome. The expected outcome of this study will be the possible effects of audiovisual presentation on the test performance of second-year BS Psychology students of Lamar colleges. Furthermore, the outcome of this study can be the basis of what type of learning modalities can be more effective on students' learning and recalling information.
And this is where our presentation ends. I am JKRM Mendoza, together with
Jean Ashley S. Baclas,
I'm Bill Jamie C. Brotonel.